Hello. It is super cold outside, so I hope that you are at home in warm socks, enjoying not being outside. But thanks for being here today with us. So, we're going to talk today about perfectionism in kids beyond high standards. We all have high pressure to succeed, adults and kids. It's a lot of societal culture about being our best, and how much our culture really prizes high achievement. Our kids and teens are definitely feeling the brunt of it too. And some people talk about how we are now expecting kids to do even more than previous generations, that we are now the highest level of high expectations that Americans have ever seen. Well, we won't get into that, but we will talk about how to work with it. And I think we all know that having too much pressure to be perfect can lead to some poor outcomes. We'll talk about what that might look like. But we're wondering, how do we recognize when healthy striving has become unhealthy perfectionism? And so Dr. Gabby Marton, who is part of the therapy team here at Small Brooklyn Psychology, she's going to teach each of us about that and give us some best practices on how to best deal with perfectionism when it comes up. And at the end of the talk, we will save time to answer some of your questions as well. So I will introduce myself. I am Mandi White-Ajmani. I am the owner of Small Brooklyn Psychology. We are a group psychology practice at Industry City in Brooklyn, New York, where we offer therapy, neuropsychological assessment, and consultation to people of all ages, all backgrounds, and all psychological concerns. At the bottom of this lovely slide here, you can see our whole team. That's me, Natasha Brown, Rebecca Abbott Sinclair, Sam Janit, Maddie Clark, Nav Gill, Cecilia Barbosa, Megan Moxie, Caroline Carberry, Gabby Marton, who was our speaker today, Amira Hanna, and Danielle DeFilippo. We all have experience working with people across the lifespan, but we also have special training and experience to work with children and parents using evidence-based assessment and treatment. And one of our ongoing goals here at Small Brooklyn is to be a resource to the community. It's really important to me. Whether you work directly with us or not, we do what we can to provide our mental health knowledge, our suggestions, our connections to other providers, activities, whatever it is. I try to cast a wide net and have a large network of people, wonderful people that I've met over time, and connect them to you. And one of the best connections that we've made over the years is obviously with Park Slope Parents. They are really the community building leaders, and I'm very grateful for their existence, their support. But they exist to get good supportive information out to families across New York City and beyond. Over the years, in partnership with Park Slope Parents, we have developed a lot of webinars on all kinds of different areas of psychology. Our most recent webinar in the fall was on how to manage screen time struggles with your kids. You can get that recording from Park Slope Parents. And then we have many other free recordings that are linked in our website. Things like tips on how to manage behavior at home and in a classroom, what a neuropsychological evaluation is and how it helps. What does twice exceptional mean? How do you help girls with ADHD? How do you help kids with OCD? And what can parent treatment do to actually help kids, sometimes better than individual therapy can? So all of these talks are available for free on our website at smallbrooklyn.com/services/talks. I will repeat that in the email that you're going to get after this webinar, so don't feel like you have to frantically write this down. We will provide the recording and the slides for you as well. All right, so now we're going to turn to perfectionism. Dr. Gabby Marton is our newest team member here at Small Brooklyn. We're very happy to have her. She's going to lead this webinar. So Dr. Gabrielle Marton is a clinical psychologist who provides evidence-based therapy for children, adolescents, and young adults. She has specialized training in many evidence-based treatments aimed at treating anxiety, OCD, selective mutism, ADHD, behavioral concerns, and social challenges. Gabby's therapy style emphasizes warmth, partnership, and empowerment. She collaborates closely with children, teens, and families to develop practical strategies that they can use both in and outside of therapy to create lasting change. So now Gabby is going to share what she knows, and I'm going to monitor the chat. If you have a question that you'd like for Gabby to answer, just type it to me in the chat box or the Q&A box. We'll save time at the end to go over as many of these as we can. Take it away, Gabby.
Thank you for that introduction. I had a whole intro slide, but that was
Oh,
even better than what I had. Um,
feel free to introduce yourself. It's all good.
yeah, but hi, I'm Dr. Gabby Martin. I'm really excited to be here today to talk with you all about perfectionism. And I wanted to thank you all for taking the time to join today. So, today you'll walk away with a really solid understanding of what perfectionism looks like in kids and teens and how it differs from healthy striving or simply wanting to do well. We'll talk about the specific signs and patterns that show up in school, home, and social situations, and how perfectionism can sometimes hide under other presentations like procrastination, rigidity, or other emotional dysregulation. I'm also going to walk through evidence-based strategies that clinicians like us use, including cognitive behavioral therapy techniques and exposure-based approaches to help really loosen the grip of rigid standards. And finally, we'll focus on what adults and caregivers can model at home and in school. So I'll give you practical tools that support flexibility, resilience, and the idea of good enough work. And the goal isn't to eliminate high standards, but to help kids learn how to tolerate mistakes and to normalize imperfections. Okay, so why does this webinar matter? So, perfectionism is becoming more common in kids and teens. Many young people are growing up in environments filled with lots of performance pressure. This can come from parents who want the best for them, achievement focused school culture, or from social media where everything looks very polished and effortless. And when this pressure builds, it can create a lot of big feelings and develop into anxiety, procrastination, and a very harsh inner voice. Perfectionism can also limit learning because kids may become afraid to make mistakes or take risks, which limits growth and confidence. And caregivers often feel unsure about when high standards are helpful versus when are they starting to become harmful. And it can be confusing to know where that line is. So we're going to talk about that a lot today. So by understanding how perfectionism works and what it looks like, caregivers and parents can support children to build resilience, confidence, and flexibility. So, to start us off here, what is the definition of perfectionism? So, perfectionism is more than just wanting to do well. It involves setting standards that are unrealistically high and often feel impossible to meet. So kids can feel an intense pressure to be flawless in everything they do, even in situations where mistakes are normal and expected. There's usually a really strong focus on performance and evaluation, and a child may care more about that final product and that grade more than the process and may worry about how they're being evaluated or how they're being compared to others. So, at the core of perfectionism is a powerful fear of making mistakes. So, mistakes can feel dangerous or embarrassing instead of being seen as a vital part of learning. And when this fear takes over, kids may avoid challenges or get overwhelmed by the possibility of not doing something perfectly or not getting that A. So, by understanding these pieces, it helps us see why perfectionism could be so limiting and why kids might struggle even when they appear to be really high achieving. So, there are two main types of perfectionism that show up for kids and teens. And the first is self-oriented perfectionism. And this is when a child puts a lot of pressure on themselves and holds very high standards that come from within. So this child might have an internal rule that says, I must be perfect. And we see with this presentation, they often criticize themselves harshly, even when adults are supportive and might not be demanding perfectionism at all from the child. The second type we're going to talk about is socially prescribed perfectionism. And this is when the child feels that other people expect perfection of them. And that might feel like teachers, parents, coaches, or peers. And even if the expectations are not actually that harsh in reality, the child experiences the pressure as coming from the outside. Not to say that there aren't some environments that do demand a lot of kids and expect perfection. So both types of these perfectionism presentations can be stressful, and some kids have one type more strongly, or it's also possible to experience a blend of the two. And as therapists, understanding which one often helps us guide our intervention. So, some questions sent in ahead of time that we got to look at asked a lot about detecting perfectionism and breaking down what ages we tend to see symptoms at. So, we see earliest signs around ages 4 to 6 when kids enter school. And these are new demands, and these kids are beginning to understand rules, routines, and how their work is being judged. Then at ages 7 to 10, children begin comparing themselves to classmates and noticing who is good at what, whether that be academics, sports, extracurriculars, or so on. And awareness of performance gets a lot stronger. Then at the 11 plus preteen and teenage age, perfectionism is often more self-oriented. And these kids judge themselves more harshly, hide mistakes, and worry what others think. However, especially in New York, we see a lot of schools do have really high standards. So it also can be socially prescribed perfectionism there too at that teenage years. And that's when we really start to see a lot of the symptoms of perfectionism and they become a little bit more obvious to adults. So, to understand perfectionism, we look at quite a few things. So, the first is that perfectionism is usually a coping strategy. So, many kids are trying to prevent failure, judgment, or moments where they might feel out of control. And there can also be a layer of shame. So, kids and teens with perfectionism often worry about not being good enough or disappointing someone important to them, while others use perfectionism as a way to avoid discomfort. Because if they can get everything just right, they believe they can escape uncertainty, making mistakes, or experiencing difficult emotions. So, understanding the function of perfectionism helps us respond with more empathy and then helps us tailor our interventions. So, healthy striving versus perfectionism. So, healthy striving looks a lot like high motivation, but it's very different from perfectionism. So, kids with healthy striving focus on growth, learning, and effort rather than just the final outcome or that grade they get at the end. Kids with healthy striving set goals that are more realistic and flexible, allowing them to make progress without as much pressure or fear involved. And these kids see mistakes as a normal part of learning, not automatic proof that they are necessarily failing. They approach challenges with curiosity and excitement instead of fear. And finally, we often see that healthy striving includes a lot more self-compassion. So these kids recognize when they did their best and give themselves credit for when they feel like they put in a genuine effort and tried their best. So for perfectionism, that shows up differently. So perfectionism shows up as rigid standards and all or nothing thinking. Performance is either seen as being perfect or as a failure. So kids may avoid tasks or procrastinate because they fear making mistakes or not doing something right. They also tend to judge themselves harshly and focus more on perfection rather than genuine effort. And this combination can make learning really stressful and limit growth because often these kids really are trying to avoid new activities or challenges because of that fear of not doing well. So, how do we identify perfectionism? So, perfectionism often shows up in behavior. So, kids may spend excessive time on simple tasks, over prepare for exams, or study more than is necessarily needed. They might avoid work or new activities because they fear mistakes. Some kids may repeatedly check or redo their work and seek lots of reassurance from adults and peers. You might also see emotional outbursts or meltdowns that can happen when things feel imperfect, wrong, or out of control. And that's why recognizing these patterns helps us understand when perfectionism is interfering with learning and well-being. So next we have cognitive indicators. So those show us what's happening in a child's mind and refers to their thoughts. So cognitions are a fancy word for thoughts. Perfectionistic kids often overestimate the consequences of small mistakes and engage in catastrophic thinking about their performance. They may doubt themselves constantly, second guess their decisions, and worry constantly about evaluations or outcomes. And what we see often is something called all or nothing thinking, also called black and white thinking. And that means thinking things are either perfect or a failure. So these thought patterns drive the behaviors we see and can make it hard for kids to feel safe taking risks or learning from their mistakes. So next we have emotional indicators. So another word for feelings. So perfectionism shows up strongly in emotions, and kids may feel anxious when starting or completing tasks or feel embarrassed about minor mistakes they make. They can become irritable when things feel out of control and may only feel relief when performance feels perfect. Perfectionistic expectations can feel overwhelming, and kids often have low frustration tolerance, which means they might react really strongly to setbacks, criticism, a score that they didn't think is perfect on an exam. So, recognizing these emotional patterns helps us really understand their inner experience. And then lastly, we also have physical indicators. So perfectionism doesn't just show up in thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. It often shows up in the body. So kids may report somatic complaints like headaches, stomach aches, or nausea, especially around stressful or new tasks. We might see muscle tension or kids saying their chest feels tight when they're feeling anxious about performance as well. Sleep can be disrupted before an evaluation or another performance, leading to kids feeling fatigued during the day. We have kids sometimes complain about appetite changes and not feeling hungry before an exam. And then some kids say that they feel like their heartbeat is going really quickly, reflecting the body's stress response. So these physical signals often coincide with the thoughts, behavioral, and emotional patterns we've already discussed and give us important clues about how much perfectionism is impacting the child's functioning. So next up, we have social media's influence on perfectionism. So social media can actually play a really big role in fueling perfectionism. Kids and teens are constantly comparing themselves to peers and influencers online, which focus on likes and followers. And this can lead to self-criticism if a child or teen feels they don't measure up to these unrealistic standards. And additionally, social media mostly shows edited, polished photos and achievements, which can make perfection seem normal or make it seem expected. Behind the scenes struggles, mistakes, or learning moments are rarely visible. So kids may think they are the only ones experiencing challenges when in reality that's not realistic. So understanding this helps us see why social media can really influence and push unrealistic standards and pressure to be perfect. So, why does professional support matter? So, perfectionism can significantly impact a child, teen, young adult, or adult's life. Research shows us that it could be linked to anxiety, mood and sleep problems, and stress at school. Kids can get caught in a cycle of fear, frustration, and harsh self-judgment, which can then interfere with learning and relationships. Professional support using evidence-based treatment helps kids and teens develop this flexibility, learn how to tolerate mistakes, and build healthy motivation. And ultimately, the goal is to help them approach challenges with confidence, recover from setbacks, and really enjoy the learning and growing process rather than being held back by their own standards. So, when to seek professional help? This question was also asked quite a few times. So, a lot of parents do wonder when they should seek help for perfectionism. And there is no one perfect moment, but there are signs that tell us a child needs more support than maybe a caregiver is able to provide at home. So, if perfectionism leads to meltdowns or shutdowns when something feels hard, that might be a sign the child is struggling. If a child refuses to do tasks, avoids new activities, or spends an excessive amount of time checking, redoing, or erasing their work, it usually means the pressure inside might feel really overwhelming. It's also important to pay attention to their self-talk. So we often hear things like, I'm terrible or I can't do anything right when kids are experiencing perfectionism. And that might be a sign that perfectionism is impacting their sense of self. And then we can also look at how it affects daily life, if it's interfering with friendships, sleep quality, appetite, or if every homework assignment turns into conflict between you and the child. These are signs that professional help might be a good course of action. So, we use cognitive behavioral therapy for perfectionism. And the main goal is to help kids and teens see and change the thinking patterns that are keeping perfectionism in place. So we start by identifying unhelpful thoughts, the rigid or all or nothing interpretations that fuel anxiety or self-criticism. And then we challenge those thoughts to see if they are accurate or useful. So the aim is to increase flexible thinking so kids can tolerate mistakes and uncertainty. And then finally, we work on reframing mistakes and looking at them really as learning opportunities rather than failures. And this approach gives kids and teens practical tools to reduce pressure on themselves and then approach challenges and new activities more confidently. So, cognitive behavioral therapy helps kids see the connection between their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And I included here the classic CBT triangle photo. And what we want to show you here is that a child's thoughts or interpretations can influence their feelings, which in turn affects their behaviors, and vice versa. So, understanding this triangle helps us intervene in one area to create change in others. So by challenging rigid thoughts, we can reduce anxiety and make behaviors like completing a challenging or new task more manageable. So, perfectionism often comes from really strong beliefs in kids' minds. So, some kids are scared of failing, so they try to avoid mistakes at all costs. So, a goal of therapy would be to help this child practice small mistakes in a safe way so they could see that mistakes are normal and they could tolerate the uncomfortable feeling. Other kids worry a lot about disappointing others, and they might think that a mistake means that they're not good enough, and we would work with this child to understand that their value doesn't necessarily come from their performance and from being perfect. And who they are is bigger than just their achievements, and that they're a more well-rounded individual. And then finally, we focus on teaching kids to judge themselves by their effort and progress, not just the results. So mistakes become helpful information instead of just proof that they're not good enough or bad at something. And over time, this treatment helps kids feel more confident and less worried about being perfect all the time. So, how does CBT support change? So, cognitive behavioral therapy helps kids see that the thoughts that pop into their minds automatically, the ones that are making them worry or feel like they have to be perfect, are not necessarily helpful or productive. So, instead of reacting right away, we teach kids and teens how to step back and ask, is this thought really true? Is this helpful? Is there evidence for this thought? And children also practice trying new behaviors, like tackling a task, even if they think they might make a mistake, or when they see that things do turn out okay, then they're able to then build confidence. And over time, this flexible way of thinking begins to feel natural and easier instead of something they have to force. So, identifying unhelpful thinking patterns. So, perfectionism often comes up from thinking patterns that make kids feel like they always have to be perfect. So, we're going to break down the main three. So, all or nothing thinking is when a child thinks something's either perfect or a failure. And the work here is to help that kid in therapy see that doing a good job doesn't have to mean being perfect. In terms of catastrophizing, that's when a child sees one small mistake and feels like it's the end of the world or jumps to the worst possible conclusion. And we help reframe this to help kids recognize that mistakes are normal, fixable, and necessary to the learning process. And then we have the self-judgment, self-talk piece. And that's when children tell themselves they always mess up or aren't good enough. And we help them notice the things they do well and learn from mistakes instead of punishing themselves mentally. So, increasing flexible thinking. So, kids with perfectionism often get stuck in rigid thinking that can make tasks really stressful. So, for example, some kids believe there's only one right way to do something. So, a big part of our work is teaching them that there are often many ways to solve a problem and multiple approaches can work. Others follow more of a perfection rule, thinking that an answer must be exact or it's wrong. And we help them see that a close or reasonable answer at times does show learning, and it's okay if it's not perfect. Some kids assume they'll fail before even trying, so then they'll avoid challenging or hard tasks. And a big piece of the work here would be to help them understand that they can't predict the future, and that what we really care about is that the child tries their best. And I think that's one line I repeat the most when working with children, teens, and parents about perfectionism is that we really care about the child trying their best rather than this outcome. And our goal is to help kids shift from the rigid all or nothing thinking to flexible thinking that leads to learning and confidence. So reframing mistakes is a really important part of helping kids with perfectionism. So in therapy, our goal is to teach kids that mistakes are opportunities to learn and not signs that they've failed. And an important thing to note is everyone makes mistakes, including adults, and that they are completely normal and oftentimes fixable. Mistakes are also an important part of growing and improving, and it's okay to get things wrong sometimes. And a phrase that I heard and I love to share with kids and teens is that we wouldn't have to go to school as a school age child if we knew everything. There would be no point. The whole point is to go in there not knowing a lot of things, making mistakes, learning and growing so that we can grow as individuals. And that if we knew everything, we wouldn't need school to exist. And finally, we emphasize that effort is just as important as performance and that doing their best and trying is what matters, not being perfect. So, next we have exposure and response prevention. And this is a type of therapy that stems from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it helps kids face the things they fear instead of avoiding them by exposing them to things that scare them in a safe environment. And the idea here is to do this gradually so they can start with small challenges and build up confidence over time. So, through exposure therapy, kids learn that they can tolerate uncertainty, mistakes, and things not being perfect, even if it is uncomfortable. And they discover that even if something doesn't go exactly right or it's really hard, they will be okay and they can handle it without getting stuck in worry or avoidance patterns. So, the key ideas for exposure and response prevention are that we always start really small. And kids face tiny versions of the things they're afraid of. So it feels doable, not overwhelming, right? Because if we started with a really big, challenging task, a kid would not want to come back to therapy. We got to start small. And every time a kid or teen practices an exposure activity, their brain learns that this mistake or uncertainty didn't hurt me. I could handle it. And that learning right there is what makes exposure and response prevention work. And over time, as kids face more challenges, their anxiety goes down and their ability to cope goes up. So the more they practice, the more confidence and flexibility they build. And exposures are not about forcing kids to be brave, it's about showing them that they already are brave and can handle these things with our support. So you might be wondering, what do these exposures look like for perfectionism? And they look really small and practical. So a few examples are turning in work that's good enough instead of perfect, making small, purposeful mistakes in classwork or chores, or writing a slightly messy letter, or leaving an extra space in a text, completing a task partially instead of really overdoing it, like spending only 15 minutes on homework instead of 2 hours. We'll also work on reducing the amount of checking or redoing work, such as writing a sentence once without erasing it multiple times to make it better. We've also practiced leaving a project slightly unfinished instead of really getting into the nitty-gritty and polishing every detail. Another exposure might look like speaking in class, even if the child is not totally confident in their answer, so they could tolerate possibly making a mistake. And sending an email or text with a tiny typo. These are just a few. Often we get pretty creative with exposures and see how perfectionism is often coming up in that specific child's or teen's life, and then we can create exposures from there. And these exposures help kids learn that mistakes, uncertainty and imperfection are uncomfortable but safe and can't hurt us. And with practice, the discomfort does get a lot smaller. So, next up, we're going to talk a little bit about reassurance seeking, which means often children with perfectionism ask a lot of questions from adults and caregivers. And they often ask a lot of reassurance that sound like, is this right? Did I mess this up? Is this good enough? Are you sure it's okay? Is it done? And reassurance might feel helpful to a child. Well, it does in the short term, because when we tell them, yes, you're right, it's perfect, it's done, their anxiety goes down right away. But that relief is often very temporary. So each time we reassure a child, the brain learns when I feel unsure, I need someone else to tell me it's okay. And often when you start answering questions, the child or teen starts to ask more questions, it increases in frequency. And this creates a loop where the child or teen feels anxious. They then go and ask an adult for reassurance. They get that reassurance and feel better in the short term, but they're more likely to ask another question the next time they're doing an assignment or challenging task. And over time, they depend on adults instead of building their own confidence. So, what helps more is gently shifting the responsibility back to the child with responses such as, I see you're checking your work because you want it to be perfect. I trust you to decide if it's done. Or you seem unsure. What do you think? And that is to teach a child that uncertainty could be uncomfortable, but they can tolerate it. And by reducing reassurance calmly and gradually, kids start to learn that I can handle not knowing for sure, which is what actually breaks the perfectionism cycle and builds longer lasting resilience. So there is a lot of parental and caregiver involvement in exposure and response prevention. Parents play a huge role in helping their child grow braver around mistakes and uncertainty. And one of the most important parts is reducing reassurance. So instead of telling a child their work is perfect, we want to help them learn to sit with that uncertainty. We also want to encourage effort and flexibility, not so much perfect performance. So, noticing the child's process, such as trying, sticking with it, practicing, matters more than how good they actually are at something to us. So, parents also support exposure work by not rescuing the child, meaning letting them do something imperfectly, even if it's uncomfortable for you to watch, and staying calm and supportive while they're trying to figure it out. And then finally, it's important to celebrate progress and promote learning over the perfection because that's where the real growth happens. And those are the wins we really want parents to praise and reinforce. And saying things like, you kept trying even though it was hard, often makes a bigger impact than good job on that test. So, how can parents fight perfectionism? They can model imperfections. So, one of the most powerful things parents can do to fight perfectionism is to model it. So, kids learn a lot from seeing adults make small mistakes and how they handle it. So, when parents or caregivers can narrate their mistakes out loud, it shows kids that mistakes aren't dangerous, they're rather normal and fixable. And this can sound really simple. It could sound like, I spilled water. Oops, I'll go clean it up. Or I messed up this recipe. Let's fix it together and see what happens. And these small moments teach kids that mistakes don't mean failure, they're just a part of everyday life. And when parents or caregivers can stay calm and flexible, kids then learn to do the same when they're in similar positions. So, how to build the foundation really early is from a young age. one way to do this is to really encourage play that includes errors to help build the foundation that mistakes are safe. That can look like open-ended art, block towers, guessing games, messy play, games that encourage flexible thinking where there's not necessarily one right answer. And then caregivers can also incorporate self-compassion language into the play, like, I'm trying, you're trying, you're so smart, I love the effort, you could do this, I can do this, into the play. And while doing these sort of activities, it is important to avoid over directing or rescuing, even if there is that urge, because we want to let kids practice struggling. And then lastly, we want to encourage all of the risk taking involved in play. So praising that immediately and saying something like, I love that you tried something new is really helpful. Additionally, when we're trying to reduce perfectionism, the language we use at home really matters. So, kids who fear mistakes usually hear a lot of comments about performance, which is usually about being so smart, getting things right all the time, doing their work perfectly. I'm sure at school there's a lot of that language going on there too, where kids are comparing grades to each other. Teachers have really high expectations. So instead, we want to highlight effort, persistence, and learning. So phrases like, I could see you worked really hard on that, or you kept trying even when it was tricky, that's great, helps kids feel proud of the process rather than the outcome. And we want parents to normalize making mistakes by saying things like, mistakes help us learn, they help us get better. And to teach kids that errors aren't something to be scared of, but rather something to learn and grow from. Another way families can reduce perfectionism is by adjusting expectations at home. So we want expectations to be realistic and flexible, not so much all or nothing. So kids should feel like there is some room for effort, learning, and just being human. And it also helps when families openly normalize mistakes, showing that errors aren't failures, just part of how we really learn. And we can encourage kids to try new activities without the pressure to excel right away. And we want kids to know that it's okay to be a beginner. And when a child hits a challenge, we want to reframe it as an opportunity to grow, not just a test of their worth or ability. And the shift helps kids feel safer taking risks and less afraid of not being perfect. I see this a lot with extracurricular activities too, like trying a new sport or another type of activity, whether it be arts and crafts, sewing, something else. And often kids are really nervous ahead of time to go because it's a new activity. And this is when it could be really useful to have a conversation with the child about how it's just for fun. It's just about doing a new activity. You just care that they try their best, and that's all we care about. Because sometimes that message just needs to be stated so the kid knows rather than us just implying that they might know that an extracurricular sport is just for fun. So, parents can play a big role in either supporting or unintentionally reinforcing perfectionism. So, first, what we suggest is to notice the ways you, as a parent or caregiver, might reinforce the idea of perfectionism. Some parents focus heavily on grades, achievement culture, or appearance, while some other parents might recognize they give so much reassurance or correct every small mistake they might see the child make. And we do recognize these actions are met with really good and loving intentions, but can make kids feel like being perfect is the only way that they'll be okay. And it's also helpful to reflect on your role and own beliefs about perfection because some parents are expecting perfection of themselves, and children may often mirror their child's, I mean, they might mirror their parents' reactions. And finally, we want parents to model calm tolerance for mistakes. So when parents show that they make a mistake and can stay calm, children learn to do the same thing. So, scaffolding independence is about helping kids learn skills gradually. So, at first, parents provide guidance and support, but over time, we want them to step back so kids can try things on their own. Then we want to encourage children to reflect on what they learned rather than focusing only on the outcome to help them see mistakes as part of growth. So we want to praise and give lots of encouragement for flexibility, persisting, experimenting with something new, and taking risks, and acknowledging that mistakes are part of learning and that trying something new is valuable, even if it doesn't go perfectly. And I included an example here, kind of just to help picture this in real life. So, if we imagine a third grader who has a poster project due, at first, a parent might help break the project down into steps, talk through ideas, and sit nearby while the child gets started. The parent might say, let's think together about how you might want to organize this. And as the child begins to work, we would encourage the parent to gradually step back. And instead of fixing mistakes or making it perfect, they allowed the child to decide where pictures go or how to word a sentence, even if it's not grammatically correct. And if the child feels stuck, the parent can then go ahead and ask guiding questions rather than giving answers. And when the project is done, the focus should be not on whether it looks perfect. And we would encourage a parent to say something like, I noticed you tried a new layout even though you weren't sure it would work. Nice job. Or you kept going even when it felt hard. So if something didn't turn out as planned, that's a great opportunity to normalize it by also saying mistakes help us learn, and now you know what you would do differently next time. So the goal here wouldn't be so much a flawless poster, it would be to help the child learn that trying new things and being flexible matters more than getting it right. Okay, so social media. So social media can feed into perfectionism. So for parents and caregivers, it could be helpful to encourage mindful usage. So it's helpful to set limits on screen time so it doesn't take over. And we want to encourage kids to follow accounts that inspire learning, growth, or authenticity rather than ones that make them feel like they're never good enough. And it's important to talk about posts together and ask questions like, does this reflect real life or is that just a highlight reel? And this helps kids understand that social media is curated and not so much reality. And importantly, modeling balanced usage ourselves because kids notice how parents and caregivers engage with screens and social media. So showing healthy habits makes a positive difference. So, to summarize some of what we went over today, perfectionism is holding oneself to high standards, often because of fear of failing, disappointing others, or feeling that self-worth depends on success. So, we provide cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps kids challenge unhelpful thoughts, think more flexibly, and refrain mistakes. And exposure and response prevention also helps kids and teens face fears gradually and tolerate mistakes in a very controlled setting in order to build confidence. And then for parental support and goals, what we encourage parents to do at home is model imperfection, focus on effort, normalize mistakes, adjust expectations at home, and celebrate risk taking and taking on new challenges. And the ultimate goal is to build resilience, flexibility, and confidence and help kids focus on growth and learning instead of perfection. Okay. And then here is our contact information for Small Brooklyn Psychology. Oh, I see you're back. Hi, Mandy.
I'm back. I know when you get to this slide, that's my cue. Yes, so always feel free to reach out to any of us for more support, whether it's just to ask the question, you could write it into Gabby and say, Gabby, is this perfectionism or is this just high standards or healthy striving? Um, Feel free to write to Gabby, to me, to Small Brooklyn at large through the hello at smallbrooklyn.com account, and we can certainly help you figure out if, what might be a good next step for you. and whether treatment will be helpful and then what that might look like. So thank you, Gabby. There's a lot of really, really good information. And so we're going to take the next 10 minutes or so. We're probably going to go a little bit past one for those of you who can stick around for a while. We would like to go through some of the questions that you have. So if you have questions, please do write them in the chat and the Q&A. I see somebody has raised their hand, but actually with the webinar format, we really can't have people talk directly. So just write them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and I will get to as many of those as I can. So first of all, you went through a good couple of slides about parents recognizing their own perfectionism and how to help with that, which is super important. And it happens to be one of the most frequent questions that we saw on the registration list. Like, what questions would you like to get out of this webinar? A lot of people asked about how to manage their own perfectionism and how to keep it from getting in the way when kids are learning not to be perfectionists, which, so surprising that New York City parents might themselves be perfectionists. I feel very seen and understood here. So you had a lot of good tips about how parents can model their own imperfections, narrate their mistakes and how they're handling them, model their own calm tolerance. I think that's really important. I also wanted to point out one of the things that we do with for kids, in addition to cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure and response prevention, we also have another parent-oriented program called SPACE, which is one of those crazy therapy acronyms. It stands for supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions. It is a very effective treatment for anxiety of all kinds. But one of the things that it really focuses on is helping parents to notice the ways that they have lovingly and caretakingly, unintentionally reinforced some of the ways that kids avoid the things that make them scared because it doesn't feel good. And so reassurance seeking, which Gabby went over a lot, is one of those things. And then also the ways that parents might be unintentionally promoting perfectionism. So SPACE is a really good program for helping parents to notice the ways that they're doing this and then slowly pull back some of those accommodations in very measured ways so that kids are building some of their own resilience. Um, Gabby, what are some of the ways that you work with parents to help kids with anxiety, but then like specifically in perfectionism specifically? Like when you're working directly with parents, what does that look like?
Yeah, I often show them the cycle of avoidance with
Mm,
perfectionism, which essentially shows that like a child might feel anxious because they are about to try a new task or do something that is scary, like go to soccer for the first time. And the kid, and what most of us want to do when we're anxious is usually to avoid.
mm,
And that's where a child may seek reassurance, beg not to go, or refuse to do homework. And the thing is, when we then let them avoid, there is short-term relief there. However, long term, the next time they have soccer practice or the next time they have to do a more challenging task, that anxiety is going to come back and it's going to come back a little bit stronger because the mind learned last time that I couldn't do this. I was actually talking
mm,
about it with parents today, about how avoidance often grows bigger and bigger.
mm.
So, in terms of like starting an assignment, because I saw this question actually earlier,
Is that-
like how to get a child to start when there is like procrastination or school
mm,
avoidance. It's usually just doing like a little exposure, like a tiny start. Like we're gonna set a timer for 1 minute and we're gonna just work on this for 1 minute and see how you feel. And
Good.
that I like that skill a lot. And oftentimes after like 1 minute, the child is then like, okay, I can
In
handle
it.
it, and is
Yeah.
usually good to keep going.
Yeah.
And
Love it.
sometimes setting a timer for 10 minutes, I'm gonna work on it for 10 minutes, take a break is also helpful.
Sweet. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Thank you. All right. So just going through some of these questions. I see someone says, why would you not recommend space therapy for perfectionism? I guess I read your mind. Thank you for asking that. But yes, I also think the space is a great treatment. Okay, so someone asked, it seems that my kid is a healthy striver, but it does worry me that as a 5-year-old, he can do he can so clearly see that kid colors better than me. They are better at football. That boy has harder books than me to read. So he's really noticing if kids are more skilled than him. How do I make sure he continues to be motivated and to understand practice can help him versus perfectionism, not wanting to try because he is just skilled? Do you think there's a risk, I guess, for kids who are already so good at noticing and comparing themselves to others, even if they're not perfectionists yet? Do you think there's a risk to getting there?
A little bit. And I think it depends on how teachers and caregivers at home talk about it because there is always going to be someone better than us at
Right.
almost everything.
Right.
And we all have our own strengths, we all have our own weaknesses. And I think a lot of the language is really important there. And I actually recommend a book that I got last year. I don't know who wrote it. It's called Beautiful Oops, and it's a really
I've
cute
heard of
book.
it.
It's a
Yeah.
really cute book about making mistakes and like noticing that some people have, like, we all have different strengths and weaknesses. So that would
Yeah.
be my opinion there.
Yeah. I remember one of my kids' teachers was super great at doing the beautiful oops sort of thing and really celebrating kids' mistakes and making it not only normalizing it, but making it fun and like turning it into a new art project or something like that. And I love that. I thought that was such a great tack to take, I suppose. I wish that more people would do that. Just making it more salient that an oops can be beautiful. That's awesome. Um, all right. So another parent says, can you speak to me about how a child who is 8 with ADHD and dyslexia is having trouble reading and has negative self-talk about school because he's having difficulties that may experience perfectionism differently? I have some thoughts here too, but what do you think, Gabby?
Yeah. Oh, that's really tough. I think targeting the self-talk piece might, I mean, would be really important there.
Yeah.
And teaching children alternative statements to say to themselves when they're saying, I'm not good enough, I can't do this. And then another big piece, I work with a lot of children that have learning disabilities and I'll see a lot of that negative self-talk is to actually provide lots of psychoeducation and teach kids how to advocate for themselves. Um,
Love that.
that's
And that
the
can make him
advocacy
really,
piece.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It can make him really feel very empowered, right? To feel like they can get what they need and ask for it when they need to. I love that. Um, yeah, I love the idea of just targeting the negative self-talk because clearly that's going to make everything harder for a kid who genuinely has difficulties. But in terms of just accepting that there are some difficulties that kids and adults have compared to other people, similar to how Gabby was saying, there's always going to be somebody who's better than you at something. There are also always going to be difficulties that you're struggling with that might be harder than what somebody else is going through. So on the neuropsych side of things, we spend a lot of time with kids helping them to understand in a very neutral and judgmentless way that everybody has strengths and weaknesses. We call them highways and construction zones. It's this great metaphor that we learned from another neuropsychologist. And the idea is based in a growth mindset that a highway is a strength that you've had that is built in the neural pathways that is overlearned and a car can travel down it like super fast and you don't even really have to think about it versus a construction zone that is still under construction and still needs time and effort and practice and help from your construction crew to get better at a certain skill, but there's no good or bad about it. Everybody has highways and construction zones well into older age. Somebody is going to have a construction zone. So it's not because you are a failure or you're less than. It's just that everybody has highways and construction zones, and these are yours. So for a kid who struggles to pay attention, for example, and not get distracted, for a kid who needs extra support in learning to read, that is ways that we talk to them about ways that they need a little extra support. They need help from their construction crew, for example. But it is not because they are terrible people. And that is then, once they can accept that that is a valueless judgment, then tackling the negative self-talk and and any sorts of strategies for helping them to get started on something that feels hard to them, I think is really important.
I see a question
Um,
in the
yeah,
chat,
please
not the Q&A one.
go for it.
Oh, how do I discourage your teachers? Oh, that's part of a longer message. Yes, teachers do often reward the outcome versus effort. I don't know how much control we
Let
have
me
over that.
Let me read the longer question, which is what to do for hyper competent perfectionist children. My child is excellent at getting their schoolwork done, generally gets good grades, and others seem to measure this as capable. All around people just seem to assume capable all around people. And they just seem to assume and expect that they are always on top of things and not realize that it requires a lot of mental effort. Yeah, we see that a lot, actually. I don't want to discourage hard work and academic inclination, but I want to help them find a healthy work life balance. How do I discourage their teachers and others from playing into the rewarding outcome versus effort part? And this actually, let's answer this in a larger context because we also got a couple of questions from the registration questions about how do you as a non-caregiver work with perfectionism. So if you're a tutor, if you're a teacher, like what are some of things that those people can do to help with perfectionism? What do you think?
I think it's a lot about the messaging we
Mm.
send kids. Like I repeat, like it's about trying our best the whole I say that like the whole session for a lot of kids with perfectionism. Like that like we'll do exposure activities. Like I have this like really impossible puzzle in my room that I like to give to perfectionist kids because no one can figure it out. And it's like
Torture.
tolerating being able to sit there and not figuring it out. And like
Yeah.
you've passed if like you stayed calm at doing it for 5 minutes and all I care about is that you tried your best and stayed calm. And I think that's the messaging that is getting missed a lot. Like if a child comes
Mm.
home and is upset over a grade, the response from the parent could be like, "Well, did you try your best?" And if the answer is
Mm.
yes, then that's all I care about.
Yeah, I love that. And so if teachers and tutors can do the same. Um, okay. What if a child says, "Yes, I did their best," but you kind of know that they didn't? Do you have any strategies for that? I'm thinking about from the
Yeah,
teachers and tutors standpoint.
that's
Any
hard
thoughts
because
about
I
that?
don't see
Mm.
perfectionists often doing that.
That's
I
true.
feel like
Actually,
they're
maybe that's a different kind
usually
of kid.
they're usually the ones studying so hard and we're encouraging them to study less.
Fair. Okay, so we need to create a new webinar for those other kids.
Yeah, because that's a whole other topic.
Another parent says, how to actually implement reframing mistakes. We try to do this, but my kid is always so busy freaking out when mistakes happen that the message never gets through.
I think this is something that when in the moment, it's not always a good time to have a learning lesson. I
Yeah.
a lot of parent management training, it's like we talk about how like you could talk to them as like the anxiety is building up, but once it's peaking and a child is freaking out, like that's not when we're gonna reframe. We're gonna just get through the moment, use a coping strategy, and then later on we could talk and reflect about how it's okay to do mistakes, maybe practicing mistakes outside of just the academics or whatever this is just for fun to build up that skill is probably needed too.
Yeah, I love that. That's important. And I think that a lot of parents and kids tend to avoid difficult conversations when things are feeling like they're going well. So why would I introduce this, even if it's a playful mistake? Why would I introduce this right now when it's just going to make them upset? Um, but it is tolerating a little bit of discomfort in the moment can really lead to longer term resilience and better outcomes over time.
Mhm.
Just two more questions. How do you soothe a child's anxiety and perfectionism in cases where something truly is a big deal? She says she feels more confident. Well, I'm assuming she. This parent feels more confident tackling everyday perfectionism with their daughter, such as when she's being perfectionist about her homework, than about bigger things. And I guess I'm thinking about like high stakes testing, um, you know, college applications, things like
Right.
that, where, yeah. What about when it genuinely is a big deal?
That's hard because
It is
sometimes
hard.
it is really a big deal. And
I
sometimes there
definitely
is a
struggle
right
with it in my
answer.
house.
Sometimes there is a right
Yeah.
answer versus wrong answer. I think it's
Yeah.
understanding it's a big deal and we still don't want to spend 6 hours on a college essay. Like
Yeah.
setting realistic expectations of what hard work looks like for whatever this big deal is. Because I
Right.
imagine they're spending too much time on it if they are a perfectionist.
And maybe also emphasizing the need to manage the freakouts, I guess, the emotional overwhelm, even when something does require hours and hours of time, even when, yes, it is a big deal and does really matter. Working through and practicing some of those coping strategies for not losing your mind. in an emotional moment, I think is necessary. And then also prioritizing some downtime and just getting away from it, building in some downtime for kids too. All right, last question. If you have kids with perfectionist personality, should you seek cognitive behavioral therapy or a full neuropsych evaluation? I can answer the neuropsych piece of it, which is that it really depends. If it's really just a perfectionist kid, you probably don't need a full neuropsych. I think that a neuropsych is really helpful for really understanding the full picture, and especially when a kid is not thriving at school or in relationships, or in your relationship at home. An evaluation can give you a full picture of a child's strengths and weaknesses, and just give you better understanding about what's going on. So I think that that kind of information is always helpful. But when it comes to what is actually needed, and especially in terms of spending a lot of money and time on it, what is actually needed, I think a lot of times you can go right to cognitive behavioral therapy and see what the therapist thinks is going on and whether shorter term work can help. And then if not, then a neuropsych eval might be more helpful down the line. But I think the therapist can help you figure that out. What do you think, Gabby? Anything to add there?
No, I was gonna say therapy would be my first recommendation if it's just the perfectionism getting in the way.
That's right. Yeah. Sweet. Well, thank you so much, Gabby. This was all really, really great information. Thanks to everybody for being here. Thanks for your questions. So we are all set for today. I'm going to send out the recording and the slides a little bit later. Make sure to join us again next month. It's going to be on February 11th. Our therapist, Maddie Clark, is going to present a talk on toddler behavior. Maybe some of you are older than this, but maybe some of you have younger children you might be interested in. The talk is entitled Tiny Humans, Big Opinions, Navigating the Nose. And we will have a registration link for that up soon. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.